All human beings throughout the world belong to a single species, Homo sapiens. But the members of this species divide themselves into subspecies. Race constitutes such divisions within humankind based on identifiable hereditary traits. Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid are major races of mankind. The term race is derived from the Latin root ratio, with a meaning similar to species or kind. Some biologists also use race to refer breeding groups with gene organization differing from that of other intra-species groups. The most widely used human racial categories are based on physical traits such as skin color, facial features, hair, eye, nose, blood groups, dermatoglybics, etc. Since the number of races depend on the traits used in the classification, and since many anthropologists base their classification on different traits, there is no fixed number of races. William Bott mentions about 5 races. Carleton Kuhn recognizes 9. John Blumenbach says about 5, and Joseph Purcell accounts 32. Systematic racial classification in anthropology typically involves geographical races and local races. Geographical race is a population isolated from one another by natural barriers such as oceans, mountains, and deserts. The traditional races, Mongoloid, Negroid, and Caucasoid, can be considered as a geographical race. Stanley Gurn, 1971, identifies 9 geographical races: Amerindians, Polynesian, Micronesian, Melanesian, Papuan, Australian, Asiatic, Indian, European, and African. A local race is a breeding population or local group whose members usually interbreed. Gurn divides human into 32 local races. Conceptions of race as well as specific racial groupings vary by culture and over time and are often controversial for scientific reasons as well as because of their impact on social identity and identity politics. Men are cultural beings. They share cultural elements and transmit through generations. It is accepted that hereditary physical differences have little to do in bringing cultural differences. However, throughout history, certain races have attributed certain characteristics such as national character, which is totally unrelated to the biological concept of race. There are common myths. The coldness of Scandinavians who are descendants of Vikings, or the martial character of the Germanic who do not advocate genocide, or the indolent nature of Africans who had to walk. Again, if the Chinese happen to be successful mathematicians, it can probably be explained in terms of emphasis on abstract concepts and their philosophies. In addition, early civilizations were not related to a single racial stock. For example, Neolithic culture of Egypt was the contribution of Hamitic people. Later, the Hyksos, the Libyans, the Assyrians, and the Persians came to Egypt at different intervals of time and contributed various strains of population. They were also in regular contact with the neighboring countries of Near East. Thus, the components of a culture are not related to a single race. There is confusion between culture and race. In many Central and South American countries, people are commonly classified as Indian, Mestizo, Mix, or Latino, Spanish descent. In these places, cultural criteria are frequently used for assigning individuals. Thus, an Indian, by speaking Spanish, wearing Western clothes, and living in European-style house among the non-Indians, is not treated as an Indian, despite the question of Indian genes he or she may possess. Racial classification and language classification must not be confused. Three languages: Welsh, Gaelic, and English are spoken in Great Britain. But the speakers of these cannot be classified simply into physical traits. In another case, the Aryan race was described as super race. But actually there was never an Aryan race. It is a linguistic group. Many languages, including ancient Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, and majority of languages spoken in Europe emerged from it. These languages are spoken by various people belonging to different cultural groups. And it is not yet certain about the original race who spoke ancient Aryan. cultural elements are shared and transmitted by the members of a society. A society is a group of individuals. The basic difference between a society and culture is that culture is a pattern of learned behavior, whereas society is a group of people. Thus, society consists of an organized group of people who share a particular culture, which is the pattern of behavior. One of the important functions of society is to transmit the cultural components which are to be shared in that society. When culture exists, there is a human society. Culture is related to society, and it is quite distinct from a race, which is a biological legacy. Race-conscious groups often threaten community solidarity. If a group is identified as a race by the in-group and out-group attitudes, then their subjective nature of antagonism can easily inflame the members of the group to a reasoning consideration of their common interests. One example is the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews. Differences in speech also help to perpetuate the fissure between race-conscious groups. Racism is a set of beliefs, ideology, and social problems that advocate the superiority of certain races over others. It leads to prejudice and discrimination against particular populations. Racists view cultural differences between peoples as the result of genetically inherited traits and tendencies. In many societies, racist beliefs was used for political suppression of minority groups. In 1930s, the Nazi racist ideology based on concept of superior and pure Aryan race caused annihilation of millions of Jews and other non-Aryan people in Europe. However, in anthropological terms, Jewish race is not recognized. One cannot easily distinguish physical characteristics of the Jews from those of the Nazis. The Nazis had to wear badges to identify themselves from the Jews. The Jews form only a cultural group and racially heterogeneous. They constitute all kinds of people from the ancient Near East who spoke Hebrew language. Color of skin is a factor which is closely associated with racism. The racists consider the white people superior to colored people. In some states, the American rule for assigning racial status is arbitrary. Anyone to have any black ancestor, no matter how remote, is classified as a member of the black race. It is called hypodescent, which means lower descent. Since the black Americans were considered to be a lower race, a person who has a black ancestor and a family history is considered black. One drop of black blood is sufficient enough to determine racial blackness. This is known as one-drop rule of racial classification. Mulatto, half black and half white. Quadroon, 1/4 black and 3/4 white. And octoroon, 1/8 black and 7/8 white, were developed to go along with this rule. Japanese society is not uniform. 10% of the Japanese population consists of minorities. Ainu, Okinawans, outcasts, Burakumin. The children of mixed marriages and immigrant nationalities, especially Koreans. Burakumin are physically and genetically indistinguishable from other Japanese, but they still face discrimination as a social race. One of the most controversial aspects of racial discrimination is the relationship between race and intelligence. Using IQ tests and other means, many attempts have been made to show the innate intellectual superiority of one race to another. But IQ scores are influenced by both genes and environment. So, the causes of differences in IQ scores cannot be known exactly until the people being compared are provided equal opportunity to develop their potential. The racist outlook was opposed by serious thinkers. Even though racists are opposed to racial admixture in order to keep the racial groups in pure state, it is an established fact that race crossing has been taking place since prehistoric times. Miscegenation is the race mixture through marriage, and there is no biological evidence of any resultant deterioration. Therefore, there was never a pure race, and at present there is no pure race, all more or less admixture. Both the concepts of pure race and the idea of inferiority of crossbreeds are wrong facts. There are many human groups which are not related to racial classification. But these groups are often misinterpreted as human groups having a relationship to physical traits that can determine race. In Northern Ireland, both Protestants and Catholics say that they can identify members of the other groups based on physical differences, despite their obvious physical similarities. At present, social scientists recognize race to be a socially constructed categorization which specifies rules for identification of a given group. Many writers do not use the term except in inverted commas to distance the use of the word from its historical and biological connotations. Today, it is preferable to use the term ethnicity or ethnic groups. The term ethnicity or ethnic group refers to an individual's cultural heritage, which is separate from one's physical characteristics. It is determined by a complex of interaction of social forces. Some anthropologists found the importance of examining single traits or unitary variables. These anthropologists describe variations within species in terms of clinal distributions rather than describing to focus on distinctive races. A cline is a geographical transition from higher to lower incidence of a biological trait. Many physical traits vary independently from one another. Anthropologists like R.C. Lewington, 1972, on the other hand, adopted a multivariate approach in examining the distribution of certain physical traits, including skin color, and hair texture. Comparing the distribution of these traits to common divisions by race, Lewington noted that traits used to identify races do not accurately reflect human variations. He found only 6% of the total amount of variation among different races, whereas almost 94% of human variation of physical traits within each of these different races. Thus, it is unnecessary to follow raciation as human groups that created discriminating racial relations. A race is a division of mankind that differs in the frequency of some gene or genes within the same species, Homo sapiens. But the concept of race is arbitrary as there is no agreement on the number of genetic differences to make a distinct race. There is no fixed number of races. There is no particular gene or allele exclusive for the individuals of one race. Many researchers find greater intra-racial differences rather than interracial differences in physical traits. This follows from genetic openness of races.